Long before wishes became prayers, before regret learned how to whisper, people believed desire itself could open doors. In those days, every wish was granted. Not some, not most, every wish. But nobody escaped happy, because what was given was never free, and what was taken was never named. This is not a story about magic. It's about price. A price paid in silence, in memory, in things no one thinks to protect. They say the spirit never said no. They also say those who asked stopped asking questions. So listen carefully. If you were offered everything you wanted, what would it cost you to say yes? This story comes from an old African tradition, carried not by ink or paper, but by memory. It lived in voices, passed from elder to child, from firelight to firelight, long before names were written down. In those days, history was not read, it was remembered. The village Saturday, where the forest met the river. Tall trees stood like witnesses, their roots twisting deep into the earth, older than any living person. By day, the river fed the land. By night, it spoke, low, steady, never silent. Crickets sang, frogs answered, and somewhere beyond the trees, drums breathed slowly into the dark, marking time the way a heartbeat marks life. When the sun fell, fires were lit, faces glowed orange and gold, shadows stretched and moved as if they had lives of their own. This was when stories were told, not for entertainment, but for survival, because stories were how people remembered what to fear and what to respect. The elders said the world was layered. What you could see was only the surface. Beneath it lived spirits, not always cruel, not always kind, but always watching. They walked the forests. They slept beneath rivers. They listened from the smoke of the fire and the spaces between drumbeats. Spirits were not strangers here. They were part of daily life. Before journeys, words were spoken. Before harvests, offerings were left. Before important decisions, silence was observed, because silence, the elders taught, was how the unseen heard best. Children were warned not to speak carelessly at night. Hunters greeted the forest before entering, and no one mocked what they could not explain. Respect was protection. Fear was wisdom. In this world, nothing happened by accident. Every gain had a cause. Every loss had a listener, and every human desire, spoken or hidden, carried weight, because the spirits were always near, and they were always listening. Among all the stories the elders carried, there was one they never told lightly. It was spoken slowly, and only when the fire burned low, because this story did not warn of war, or famine, or wild animals. It warned of something far more dangerous, a spirit, not a god, and not a ghost, but something older than both, known by different names across the land. Its presence appeared wherever desperation grew heavy enough to be heard. Some said it lived at the bend of the river. Others believed it waited deep within the forest, where sunlight struggled to reach the ground. But everyone agreed on one truth. The spirit granted wishes. It did not bargain. It did not delay. And it never said no. If a person asked for wealth, wealth followed. If they asked for power, power came. If they asked for love, protection, children, escape, the spirit listened, and the world shifted to obey. There were no riddles, no tests of worth, no signs of refusal. And that was why the elders were afraid. Because there was only one rule, just one. Never ask the spirit for anything. The rule was simple. It was repeated often. Children learned it before they learned the names of the stars. The elders said the danger was not in the wish itself, but in what followed, because the spirit never explained the cost. It never asked for permission, and it never revealed what it would take in return. The cost was never discussed. Not before, not during, not even after. People only noticed the payment when something was already missing. The elders warned that the spirit did not steal gold or cattle. It took things harder to see: peace, memory, time, love, identity, things no one thinks to guard until they are gone. And by then, the wish had already been fulfilled. So the warning was passed down, unchanged, generation after generation. The spirit never said no. The price was never clear. And once you asked, the choice was no longer yours. That was the rule, and it was a rule no one believed, until someone broke it. Among the people of the village lived a man much like the others. He was not born into power, and his name carried no special meaning beyond his family. He worked the land when the rains allowed it. He fished the river when the waters were kind. And when neither answered him, he waited, like everyone else, for better days. But waiting is hardest for those who remember easier times. He had known fullness once, not wealth, but enough food to share, enough laughter to fill the evenings, enough hope to believe tomorrow would not be worse than today. Over time, those things began to thin. The harvest failed more often. The river gave less. Faces around him aged faster, worn down by quiet disappointment. He did not complain. In the village, suffering was endured quietly, but inside him grew a restlessness he could not name, a feeling that life had narrowed, that effort no longer matched reward. He watched others struggle too, and told himself this was simply the way of the world. Still, desire has a way of whispering when the night grows long. He remembered the elders' warnings. Everyone did. The rule was clear, and he had repeated it himself since childhood. Yet the rule felt distant now, like a story meant for other people, in other circumstances. Hunger makes stories feel unreal. Loss makes rules feel flexible. Sometimes, as he Saturday alone by the dying fire, he wondered what it would be like to stop enduring and start choosing, to ask for relief instead of waiting for it, to bend the world just once, only enough to breathe again. He told himself these were harmless thoughts, but thoughts, when fed by need, do not remain thoughts for long. And without realizing it, the seed of temptation took root, quiet, patient, growing stronger each time desperation spoke louder than memory. It began with whispers, not the kind meant to be heard openly, but the kind shared in low voices at the edge of the fire, when children had been sent away and the night felt close. Stories of people who had gone into the forest with empty hands and returned changed. One man's nets began to fill again, heavy with fish, even in a season of scarcity. A woman who had known only loss carried a child on her back. Of farmers' fields, once dry and stubborn, turned green almost overnight. These were facts no one could deny. The wishes had worked. But alongside the blessings came silences. The fisherman stopped laughing. The woman no longer sang. The farmer, once generous, avoided the eyes of others and slept alone. No one could say what was missing, only that something was. When asked, they changed the subject. When pressed, they grew angry, and when night fell, their fires burned apart from the rest. The elders noticed. They began to speak more often, reminding the people of old warnings. They told stories of past generations, of villages that had learned too late that shortcuts lead somewhere you cannot return from. They spoke of balance, of patience, of the danger of asking the unseen to solve problems meant for humans to endure. And the signs followed. Animals appeared where they should not be, birds circling silently at dusk, snakes crossing paths without fear. Dreams grew vivid and uneasy. The man began to wake before dawn, heart racing, his mind filled with images he could not explain, a calm voice without a face, a hand offering something bright, and a shadow standing just behind it. He tried to ignore it. He repeated the rule to himself, the way he had been taught. Never ask, never speak the desire aloud. Never invite what listens too closely. He told himself that survival did not require miracles, only patience. But patience had grown thin. Each day, the contrast sharpened. He saw what the others had gained. He felt what he continued to lack. And with every passing night, the question returned, softer than fear, but stronger than reason. What if the elders were wrong? What if the cost could be borne? What if this was the only way out? He hesitated. Again and again, he hesitated. But hesitation does not stop desire. It only teaches it how to wait. And somewhere, beyond the firelight, beyond the river's bend and the forest's edge, something listened, quietly, as the rule echoed in his mind, growing weaker each time it was repeated. The night had grown heavy, as though the air itself were holding its breath. The fire's glow danced weakly against the shadows of the forest, and even the river seemed to pause. Its usual murmurs hushed. He walked to the bend, where the trees opened to the clearing, drawn by a feeling he could not name, a presence that had waited patiently for him to decide. And there it was, not a man, not a beast, something older, something still. The spirit stood where the darkness was thickest, its form shifting with the movement of the leaves. Yet its eyes, if they could be called that, were steady and certain, calm, unwavering. It did not ask, it did not plead, it did not threaten. It simply waited. He knelt, heart pounding, and whispered the words he had rehearsed 1,000 times in his mind. I wish for enough to live without hunger, for my family to never know want again. The air shifted. A silence fell so deep it pressed against his ears. And then, as if the forest itself had obeyed, the river's surface shimmered, the wind stilled, the fire paused mid-flicker. The wish had been heard. Already, change began. But something was different, subtle, hard to name. He felt it first in the emptiness beside him, a space where warmth had been before, a sense of absence, not of objects, not of wealth, not of life itself, but of something quieter, something essential, the unseen, already withdrawn. He looked to the village, to his family, to the familiar paths home, expecting relief, celebration, but none came. The night was still, the air felt thinner, even the animals were silent. The wish was granted, and yet the world felt altered. At first, life seemed to shift in his favor. The fields yielded fruit beyond what he had imagined. The river teemed with fish that leapt into his nets as if guided by unseen hands. His home was full, and for the first time in years, there was laughter, soft, cautious, but real. It seemed as though the spirit had kept its promise, as though the wish had been pure and harmless. But the world does not give without taking. He began to notice small changes at first, almost imperceptible. Faces he had known well felt different. Words spoken by his children, once familiar, carried a hollow weight. The warmth of his wife's presence seemed distant, as if a thin veil separated them. Nights were quieter, yet heavier, and the comfort of sleep no longer came easily. The elders' warnings returned in his mind, faint echoes he had once ignored. They had said that punishment never rushes, that the cost often arrives slowly, creeping in unnoticed until it is impossible to undo. And now he understood. The spirit had granted his desire, but it had taken more than he could see. Not wealth, not food, not simple comfort, something less tangible, but far deeper, the ease of living, the quiet trust in the world, the sense of safety and certainty he had once known. Each gain had been balanced by loss. The joy he had wished for was tinged with emptiness. The blessings that had seemed miraculous were not free. They were heavy with absence. He began to realize that the spirit's gift was never meant to satisfy the human heart, only to expose its longing. By the time he understood, it was too late. The change had settled into the rhythm of his life, and no amount of regret could summon what had quietly departed. The cost had been paid, silently, inevitably, completely, and in that silence, he finally remembered the rule, the one rule the elders had repeated for generations, the one he had dismissed. The spirit never said no, and the price was never spoken. When the elders heard of what had happened, they spoke not with anger, but with quiet understanding. They reminded the village of a truth that had endured through generations. The spirit was neither cruel nor kind. It was a mirror, a reflection of human desire, shaped by what one dared to ask and how little one understood the cost. They said that patience was a kind of wealth, often more valuable than what the hands can hold. That greed, even when cloaked in hope, carries its own shadow. That power or comfort gained without foresight leaves the soul hollow, and even the richest days can feel empty. Every gain, the elders whispered, is balanced by a loss unseen. The heart that asks without thought pays with what it cannot replace. The story was no longer about wishes, they said. It was about humans and the choices they make when desire grows louder than wisdom. A lesson passed through time, that not every gift is meant to be taken, and that the price is always closer than it appears. And so the tale became a warning, not a myth to entertain, but a guide to the living. Watch your desires, weigh your wishes, and remember, the unseen always listens. Some say the spirit still waits, patient as ever, at the bend of a river, in the shadow of an old tree, or in the silence between drum beats. They say people still speak their wishes into the night, unaware of what listens, unaware of what will be taken. Every wish is granted, but nobody escapes happy. The lesson echoes as it did by the firelight of old. The cost is always closer than the desire, and regret has a voice that lingers longer than celebration. So listen carefully, for stories like this are not told to entertain. They are warnings, and if you walk too close to the unseen, perhaps you will hear it too, waiting quietly, as it always has.